What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunched Boxing News, round 2. And I have some new news concerning Jim Gray and Mike Tyson. Okay, I've heard in the comments that Jim Gray called out Mike Tyson on a disconnect between Deontay Wilder and himself. Okay, and Jim Gray did say that you should get to know Deontay Wilder. He's a great man. He's a family man. He has a daughter with spinal bifida, yeah. And he does a lot of things outside the ring, and you should get to know him for the things that he does in and outside the ring. And Mike said, "Well, I don't know him." Then Jim Gray was like, "Well, Mike Tyson said, well, Lennox Lewis and Anthony Joshua has also a disconnect." And Jim Gray was like, "No, I'm talking about what we do over here because I don't really know Joshua that well. But I know Deontay, and he's a great man, and you need to get to know him and with him." And then he asked Mike Tyson another question. The greats, even though they thought they could beat you, you still looked up to them. Okay. And he said, yeah. And he said, well, I used to go out and hang out with them, just go hang out at places just to be around them. He said, well, did they know you were there? He said, no. He said, okay, well, it's up to you to reach out to Deontay Wilder. Okay. And a lot of people, and I've seen some videos about it, and they got some good points, but let me counterpunch. Okay. I believe the disconnect is not just because Deontay Wilder felt that he could beat Mike Tyson. Okay, I don't think that has anything to do with the disconnect. I think the disconnect has everything to do with pride. Because when you see something, or you do something, or you duplicate something that somebody else did, but then you get a different reaction, I can see how that can create envy. Okay, not jealousy. Envy. And I think Mike Tyson, for what he did, because Wilder has mentioned Mike Tyson in several videos, but one, he criticized his resume on how many Hall of Famers did he fight. I did a video on it a couple months ago, and Wilder was pretty much saying like, hey, well, who did he fight? Like, he was criticizing his resume, and he was really doubting his status of him being the legend that he is. Well, that might have not affected Mike Tyson. But if Deontay Wilder had to say that and bring that to the forefront, obviously that was bothering Deontay Wilder. So as opposed to Jim Gray saying, hey, Mike, you need to reach out to Deontay Wilder. I mean, Mike could do that, but then Wilder could also do that. And I know he wasn't talking to Wilder, but my counterpunch to Jim Gray is the next time Jim Gray gets a chance to interview Deontay Wilder, he should have that same conversation with Wilder. Okay? Both sides. You can't tell this older guy that, hey, he should reach out to the younger guy. I'm going to tell you why. For one, when Mike Tyson was hanging around those champs, he wasn't that guy yet. But when he was that guy, he had respect for his elders. He looked up to Ali. He looked up to Foreman. He looked up to Frazier. Okay, he had no business. He had no problem acknowledging them as the great. Obviously, Wilder has that problem acknowledging Mike Tyson. So again, I don't know how that affects Mike, but I can understand the disconnect due to the conversations that both of these guys, well, not even really both, well, kind of Mike, said about each other to other people. So if you got two people that don't know each other, but they're talking about themselves, each other, to other people, that word gets back to them. And by the time it gets back to them, it looks like slander. You see what I mean? Even if Wilder heard that Mike Tyson, hey, he needs to fight people, but was that hate? Was that hating though? No. I'm gonna tell you why that wasn't hating. Because if you listen to the rest of what Mike said, I'm sure he's a good fighter. I'm sure he's a great fighter, but he hasn't fought those guys yet. He's fighting this little pudgy dude, Esteverne, right? But that wasn't really hating. Now, if you're sensitive, you would think that is, or if you're one of those fanatical guys, those fanatical fans that look at Mike and say, "Oh, you hating because of everything he says is subjective." It's not. It's not one of those like ass-kissing, brown-nosing, generalized fan statements. People will look at you or look at that person and doubt them, just like they do me. Because I get a lot of comments about how I feel about Wilder, and when I give Wilder props, it ain't enough. And then when I talk about him, it ain't enough. Now that we talk about things that clear it up about Wilder, it ain't enough. So it's never going to be enough. Okay, somebody will always be complaining. You can't please everybody. I get that. But between Wilder and Tyson, Mike Tyson, meaning, I believe the disconnect is due to pride. And I think the pride is coming on the side of Wilder. And I think Jim Gray, again, he should talk to Wilder and ask Wilder and say the same things to Wilder and tell Wilder the same things that the way, because he known Mike for 36 years. So tell him like the things that Mike Tyson did in comparison to what he did. And tell him like, hey, you're the young guy. You need to respect them, because I don't see that respect coming from Wilder. Okay, again, when you duplicate something and then you don't get that response that you got from the person you're trying to duplicate, this is what you're going to have. You're going to have a lot of envy, because a lot of people shied on Wilder for the things that he said about the other American champion, Mike Tyson. You know, people see that as disrespectful. I think Wilder did that because I think he envied Mike, because when Mike said, "I want to eat your kids, I want to eat your children, F you till you love me," those type of things. So when he said that, he got a certain response. But Wilder needs to understand, when Mike was saying those things, it was a different time frame. We're not that. This is not that time frame. However, he did say them. Now, Wilder say, "Hey, I want to catch a body. I want to look a little boy in his eyes while I cripple his daddy." People are gonna, and then I know he was trying to duplicate those type of things, mixed with a little Mayweather in there. Like, hey, yes, I'm better than Muhammad Ali. You know what I mean? Yes, I'm better than him. But when Wilder said, "Yes, I can beat Mike Tyson in his prime," okay, people shunned on that. So I don't think he got the response that he needed or wanted by doing what he was doing or saying what he was saying to get a certain reaction. It made a lot of conversation, but it grew a lot of critics. Okay, critics grew after that. The spectators that was like, "Whoa, what do you mean by that?" Including his rival Tyson Fury. So it's one of those things where I feel that Jim Gray, he did say, and it was advice. Okay, he didn't call out or punk Mike Tyson in any kind of way. He just said, "Well, hey, you do." Because Jim Gray's like that. Jim Gray talks, though, he's a very informative person. He talks in an imperative kind of way where he's like, "Well, I think you really need to get to know him. You really do." And vice versa. So vice versa means both. Okay, that's why, again, for the last time, he needs to tell Wilder that when Wilder comes on, when he has the opportunity to talk to Wilder. Because if there's a disconnect, it's all about a reconnect. That's if Wilder wants that. Okay, so this is a lot of ifs that's involved with that. Because what if Mike comes out to extend his hand and Wilder slaps it? Like, "Yo, don't talk to me. I don't need to talk to you. I don't need you. I'm the bomb squad. Alabama sledgehammer." You know what I mean? He might take that route. Who knows? But I think the disconnect is not just coming from Mike Tyson. I think it's coming from both sides. And I think Mike is more open now, though. Okay, if there were going to be a sit down or an attempt to connect these two guys to get them to really know each other, as Americans, as champions, or former champions, or whatever, I think it would be now. I think to reach out to Mike Tyson now, or Mike Tyson reaching out to him because he's more receptive, because he's wiser. He's, he knows a lot more, and he's willing to tolerate a lot of things or acknowledge, things that back in the day he probably wouldn't have. So I think if this is the best time, if any, if these guys are going to have a reconnect. So Mike can probably teach him something. Again, that's if Deontay Wilder is willing to learn. Okay? But anyway, that's my counterpunch on Jim Gray and Mike Tyson along with Deontay Wilder. You guys tell me what you think about Jim Gray's statements. Of course, please subscribe. Hit that bell icon. And you guys been Counterpunched. Peace.